Welcome to a new limited podcast series called The Card Diary by Hobby S. Thompson, where I invite you to join me on my cardboard journey as I try different ways to enjoy the trading card hobby as a jack of all trades and a master of none in the style of Hunter S. Thompson. Whether you're a beginner or advanced hobbyist, I hope that you will allow me to be your guide into various corners of the sports card and non-sports card world while I share my thoughts and opinions in this podcast medium, and also to have guests who have actual expertise and knowledge to share so that we can all learn and grow together. The Card Diary by Hobby S. Thompson. Presented, written, produced, directed, edited, and narrated by Denny Cards. Okay, so that was my planned intro to record for this podcast, but I think I sound a little ridiculous. I don't know if you can imagine someone doing a podcast where it sounds like Serial, but I mean, I think I would actually love that. But no, you just get another podcast about sports cards and non-sports cards with maybe some production value, but there is no sound engineer or mixer here. Here's the deal. I'm Denny Cards, but my podcast alias or hat that I'm planning to wear is Hobby S. Thompson. And no, just to get this out of the way, I do not speak for the hobby. Let's just get that out of the way. It's a fun alias. I'll explain that in a moment here. But let me plug that Instagram account right at the top. On Instagram, I'm there as Denny_cards. But for this podcast, it's Hobby S. Thompson. All one word, no periods or spaces. And that's a new Instagram account starting from 0 or maybe starting from 1 because I'm following my own account. But if you follow that along, you will be at the ground level of something that I hope is awesome. This account, of course, again, in conjunction with my personal Instagram account. And if you follow me on that one, the Denny_cards one, you may have seen me do a bunch of things. You know, show some cards, mainly 90s basketball to start when I started my account. Then I started going into other sports and non-sports cards, and I was showing the buying side, the selling side, like, you know, a lot of us do. And I started making some informative videos, funny videos, silly videos, reposting and sharing other people's videos. You know, I would be making some memes, putting up polls, and sometimes, you know, I would like shine the light here and there on some companies. And, you know, I was just sharing my cardboard journey in general. And the main thing, though, is I love this hobby and I love podcasts. I like to have fun, and I'm not an industry insider. This is not a business for me. This is a hobby. That's it. To me, it's just a hobby, although one that is certainly very addicting. But I just try to have fun with all of this. And the reason I decided to do a podcast is because of the limitations on Instagram, which is my favorite social media account or platform. But in Instagram, it's really mostly short form 90-second reels. And TikTok is even more brutally short form if you want to, you know, be successful or viral. So for me, I thought the podcast medium would be a perfect way for me to deep dive into some topics. So back to the name of this podcast. Why is this podcast called The Card Diary by Hobby S. Thompson? For those of you who have no interest as to the reason at all, just skip this because you can do that, right? Skip it for about a minute or so. I don't know how long it's going to go, but for the rest of you, here we go. Some of you may be familiar with an American writer and journalist named Hunter S. Thompson, who is probably most famously known for embedding himself with the motorcycle group Hell's Angels back in the 1960s. And he wrote about what it was like to be in that group. He completely immersed himself into that world and learned from those experiences. And then he put that out in the form of literary work that the reader could enjoy. And that genre is called gonzo journalism. And there are other writers who have done this, but he is considered the founding father of it, or at least widely known to be. So one of his most famous works is called The Rum Diary. And so I thought, why not call this The Card Diary and have it be a play on the name of the author and his book? Because my goal for this podcast is to completely immerse myself into various aspects of the hobby and try different things and share out my experiences. So basically, I just want to show you my hobby journey, different things that I've done or plan to do within the hobby, and just, along the way, I'm just trying to figure out what I like to do, what I don't like to do within the hobby, and have you along for the ride. And maybe you'll try these different things out, or maybe you won't. But if you do try them out, maybe you'll see what you like or don't like. And the great thing is with all of this really is that there are no right answers. There are no right paths. We all have our different journeys. We all have our different paths. And I kind of liken it to an RPG, or for you non-nerds out there, role-playing game, where basically you get to choose your own adventure. And so that's kind of like the book theme for this podcast. It's like a choose your own adventure book. It's a rum diary, card diary. And I plan to have different episodes, or I'm going to maybe call them chapters. And I guess this is, in a way, the prologue before the books start, the introduction. And, of course, what is past is prologue. I forget where that's from. But I'm here discussing these particular different aspects of the hobby in each chapter, and you can jump around to whatever you want to listen to and maybe try it out yourself. So before I get into those different things that we can do within the hobby, I think it's important for us to just lay the groundwork and talk about what is the hobby, because I think for those of you who, again, follow me on Instagram at Denny_cards, like you'll know, we're in the sports card world and non-sports card world. We're talking about the pieces of cardboard, right? But for those of you who are just randomly finding this podcast, because I have no clue who the audience is going to be, but based on the title of this podcast, of course, it's about cards, and folks mainly talk about the sports cards. And then, I also remember, though, as a kid, I had trading card game cards, Magic the Gathering, and trading card game cards, and non-sports cards, and pop culture cards. These are all kind of like in the same category, and I don't know, maybe I'll get flack from people saying that it's not, but I remember having cards as a kid, and yet my number one love that I'll come back to, and it still is to this day, is basketball cards. And so more specifically 90s rare inserts, and that's why my profile pic, unless it has changed by the time you listen to this, but my profile pic for Denny_cards is my name, Denny Cards, and it replaces the logo for the NBA Jam video game, which I played a ridiculous amount of as a kid. So this phrase, the hobby, right? So even though there are so many hobbies in the world, right, collecting, and you can collect glass, stamps, Beanie Babies. I guess that's a shout out to the King of Collectibles in the first episode with Alex and all of her wonderful Beanie Babies. And maybe you found this podcast because you watched that show. I don't know, but you got those. You got knitting, crocheting, just to name a few. Collectors, though, in this card space, we call it the hobby, because we in this space consider this the best hobby in the world. And I agree. But also, if you're tuning into this to learn how to knit a sweater, you're going to be sorely disappointed. So that is what this podcast is about, shining a light on various aspects of the hobby. I like to call them the gerunds of the hobby, okay? A gerund is a verb ending in ing. Again, sorry, more book nerdy stuff. So buying, selling, trading, collecting, we all know and do these things, or a lot of us do. Otherwise, I don't know, you wouldn't be listening to this, again, unless you are completely new to this world. But there's also taking pictures of our cards, creating custom card art, cleaning cards, grading cards, more specifically submitting or subbing for grading companies to grade our cards. There's memeing, there's graphing, which is trying to get in-person autographs in real life by celebrities and athletes. There's breaking, there's streaming, there's consigning, and there's so much more. But the extra twist to all of this that I would like to do in this podcast series is I would like to learn along the way and try my hand in all aspects of the hobby, all of these gerunds and more. And again, that's the Hobby S. Thompson angle on all of this, and the way I plan to differentiate myself from all the sports card podcast content out there. So my goal for this limited podcast series is for it to be evergreen content, meaning it's not about the current market or current sports events. There are great podcasts out there for that type of information. But this is for anyone who is, either new to the hobby or has been it for a little bit, or, maybe you have been around for a while, but it's for someone who wants to learn about other areas of the hobby And you can pick this up whether it's the day it's released or years on the road. I just hope that it's relevant for whenever you actually listen to this. And so, again, with evergreen content, I don't plan for this to be, a podcast about hot and cold cards, or, buy, sell, or hold specific cards or genres, talking about the playoffs, right? Like playoffs, I don't know if that's going to ever get old, but I love that. But if you follow me on Instagram, you can see that I do things differently. I mean, of course, sometimes I imitate other creators, and honestly, to me, it's like a form of flattery, imitation as a form of flattery. But sometimes I do cheesy things, sometimes I do wholesome things, and just in general, I like to show the fun side of the hobby. I can also sometimes take the hobby too seriously. I've been told that I take it too seriously. I don't take it too seriously. And I don't know, like everyone, can have their own opinion about my social media presence. But, in my opinion, it's kind of like the Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Some of you, my soup's going to be too hot. For some of you, it's going to be too cold. And for hopefully some of you, it's going to be just right. So, if the soup is too cold or hot, I mean, don't eat it. Don't listen to this. I don't know. Or don't eat the soup. What did I say? Don't eat the soup? Maybe it's don't drink the soup. I don't know. I mean, maybe if it's a stew, like you eat it. And if it's, like more liquidy and clear, you drink it. Okay. So I'm going to pause here. All right, I had to pause it there because I thought I was starting to get a little ridiculous. But getting back on track, I want to be your guide into various areas of the hobby that we all love so much. Because if you're tuning into this, I'm assuming that you love it, and if you don't, that you're going to love it real soon. So another goal I have for this podcast is for it to be family friendly, that you can listen to it in the car with kids or pets. We know pets can understand what we say, right? I mean, let's just get that straight. But hopefully you can listen to this while doing chores without having to put earbuds on, unless your significant other is like, hey, are you listening to more sports card or, hobby content? But my hope is to keep this PC. But I do apologize in advance if I or my guests, especially if they slip up. I don't know how to bleep things yet. I'm still learning this. So to give you a general framework of how I want this to work with this podcast, I plan for these monologues like this one I'm doing right now for it to be audio only, and for it to be loosely scripted with talking points and, just kind of like my journey. And then what I want to do is bring on guests who have these, who are like industry leaders or experts in their respective crafts. And I would like to have that be like free form. I don't know if it's going to be what I'm going to call it, like an interview, conversation, fireside chat. I don't know, something like that. But I'm planning to have it kind of be like a one-of-one interview, have it be light, have it be funny. And that I think I do want to maybe make it an audio and video and posting that up on YouTube, and also have it available in podcast form, because, that's the ultimate goal for me for this, is to have it in a audio format that you can just, listen to with whatever you're doing. And my goal with those conversations, or whatever I'm going to end up calling them, is to learn along the way from these experts, because I am absolutely not holding myself out to any listeners out there that I'm an expert in any of this, or that I'm super knowledgeable in any of this. But here's the thing. Here's what I think is the important part. What I think makes me wholly unqualified to have this podcast is what's going to be fun about it. Because my hope is that I'm not talking at you or talking down to you because I think, or I know so much more, but that I'm talking with you and that I'm learning along with you during these guest spots. And my monologues, it's, that's just my thoughts about, certain aspects of the hobby and, my experiences. And I don't think, my experiences could be wrong. I'm not saying that they're going to be the right path or the right things to do. It's just that what's worked for me or what hasn't worked for me. going back to these guests, I have no clue who's going to say yes to my requests. I definitely have some irons on the stove, people who I've asked, people who are saying they're interested, but then maybe they listen to this first episode and they're like, this guy is crazy, or I don't like this. But the great thing about this hobby is that there's so many folks who are masters in their respective fields that I think it'll be okay if I get a no here or there. I can find someone else who's good at, X, Y, or Z. So going back to just this whole podcast, this is my first time trying this. I have been a guest on other sports card and non-sports card related podcasts. And I will very much admit that I have thought about doing this podcast for a while, even though I haven't been back in the hobby for that long. But what I realized is that my first few podcasts don't have to be like really good or perfect, because I have no experience with making a podcast. I cannot expect for this to be great right off the bat. And, I've been delaying releasing this podcast because I wanted it to be perfect. And, but what's the saying out there for some of the best TV shows? It's a slow beginning. It picks up in episode like 4 or 5. So, there's just no way that I'm going to find my stride in this prologue or episode 1 or 0, whatever I'm calling this. But, there's that saying that perfect is the enemy of good. And I do believe that's what's delayed me from doing this podcast. I had this idea for this audio podcast months earlier, and I shopped it around. Don't worry, I promise y'all who I asked. For now you'll remain nameless, but I really love this medium. I've learned so much from consuming content, and I feel like I was a sponge, and I was absorbing, and I just felt that time was right for me to just share out. I just wanted to get my voice out there because I think we all have great stories to tell, and so I do hope that I have some fun guests who are able to share their knowledge with us so that we can all learn. So, should I pause it there? Okay, let me pause it right there, and then I'm going to, because I don't want to re-record this if I screw up this next segment. That's why I'm pausing it. All right, one moment. All right, I think giving myself a little break was good, so I can just catch my breath. I just feel like I'm losing my breath doing this. So, all right, so what I wanted to do was talk about this hesitation that I had for a little bit, okay? Because I think there's a good general point here that I wrote down in my notes app, and I wanted to share it out. So it's about the speed of the hobby and just different things we do and the timing of things. So some of my closer friends in and out of the hobby knew that I've been spending more than 2 months, 3 months thinking about doing this podcast. And for people outside of the hobby, that's not a long time, 2-3 months. But for those of us in the hobby, we know that the hobby moves fast. Not just the content out there, but also the movement of prices and cards and prices of cards and players. And I don't know if you feel the same way, but sometimes I feel like a week in the hobby can feel like a month with just so much out there. There's just so much content to consume and so much fun to be had. So I had a hobby friend who likened the speed of the hobby like this to me, and I hope, it's an analogy. I hope it resonates with you. If it doesn't, it's all right. You can skip if you want, if this starts to get boring. But here it goes, okay? Do you remember being a teenager? And actually, I should just say maybe you are a teenager right now. But, assuming that you're not, and assuming that you're, like a grown adult and all that, do you remember being a teenager where you were home and your friends pull up in one of their cars? Not cards, but cars. C-A-R, no D. And they honk the horn or they knock on your door, and or some combination of both. And this is like the pre-cell phone era where everyone texts ahead of time and everyone knows what's up. But you open the door and they say, hey, hop in the car, we're going to go somewhere, we're going to do something fun. And you're home and you're just you have no information, you're you're not even ready to go out, but you're like, what's going on? And you have all these questions, but they're like, no, come on, get in, let's have fun, let's go drive somewhere. And the question is, do you get in? Do you jump into the car at that time? I think that when you're younger and you have less responsibilities, you are more likely to get into that car. And that when you're older, you tend to come up with reasons not to, and that you don't end up getting in. And there's a saying from The Office, which a show that I love, and I started memeing that early in my podcast, not podcast, my social media, my Instagram hobby account, and it was one character saying to Pam, Pam Beasley, the receptionist, like, there's a million reasons to say no, or there's a million reasons not to do something. And, I think at that point, it was like something about her artwork or something like that. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. But that's the hobby. It moves fast. And hopefully there are many opportunities to get in. And maybe you do wait for a better time the next time. But sometimes the car comes by and you just have to figure out, are you going to get in? Trades or deals to be made. Are you going to make that deal? Opportunities may come by. I've had some really cool opportunities come my way. Not just guest spots on podcasts, but things I'm not going to get into right now, but just some really cool opportunities. And sometimes I've said no, but sometimes I'm like, you know what? If I say no now, maybe that car doesn't come back around. So, or maybe that opportunity just passes by. But I don't know. It's such a strange thing. Like time in general. We always talk about. Well, not we always, but there's like that saying that time is a social construct and what is time and all that. But I feel like in the hobby, time just flies by. So anyway, I'm starting now with the podcast. It doesn't matter how much I've delayed it. I just need to get the reps in. I need to hit record and go like I'm doing right now. I need to try to get my 10,000 hours in. That's the concept from Malcolm Gladwell in his book Outliers. By the way, not an official sponsor, where he theorizes that in order to master something, you have to put in 10,000 hours, which does sound like way too many hours. It sounds like way too much work. And I don't know if I want to be a master of podcasting or master of any, like I said, jack of all trades, master of none. That's kind of what I want to be. So, but I just do know that I need to get my reps in. I need to get my hours in. I need to just do this and just move forward. So I think that's doable. And I'm going to pause here to catch my breath again. All right. So I talked a lot about what this podcast is going to be, but I realized I haven't really explained my background or who I am. Like, why should you listen to me? I've already said I'm wholly unqualified to do this podcast, but you should at least know something about me, right? So I turned 40 in September of 2022. I'm recording this first podcast in May of 2023. So what is that, like 8 months? That's when I came back into the hobby. But I've been around the hobby since the 90s, when I first started collecting as a 10-year-old. Like many kids during that time, I gravitated towards Michael Jordan, which was only slightly troublesome with my friends who were Knicks fans because I grew up in Queens, New York City as a kid. And, but even they knew he was good. And again, this is like the early Jordan, not like now we know him with the 6 rings and 6-0 in the finals and etc. But he wasn't just really good at the time. He was cool. He had that riz, which is what the kids nowadays say. And of course, the kids also say that, how goated he is. Oh, he's the GOAT and all that stuff. I mean, we didn't use those words back then, but he was really cool and he was on the rise. He was just starting to win, his first championship. And I remember, I would take my allowance money and, buy Upper Deck Collector's Choice packs for $1, chasing Jordans. Maybe on a special occasion, like my birthday, splurge for I think it was like a $4 Flair Showcase pack and just kind of like saving up for cooler cards like that. I didn't really open up that many Flair Showcase. But I definitely remember one time my parents, their friend from out of town who hadn't seen them in a long time, he was trying to make up for past birthdays, and he was just really nice. I guess he had a lot of money, but he gave me $100 bill, and I don't even remember who he is anymore, but I remember what I do remember is I felt like Charlie in the, story or movie Charlie in the Chocolate Factory. I felt like I had this golden ticket in my hand. So I rushed over to my local card shop, which was, I mean, it was only like a block away, but I felt like I was so giddy, and I took that $100, and I think maybe it was like a 40 to $50 box, or I can't remember exactly how much it was, but I bought myself a hobby box of 92, 93 Top Stadium Club. And I think I just ripped that whole thing at the store. And, that was so special because, I wouldn't do things like that. I wouldn't rip a whole box or, something like that. But I like to think that I pack pulled a Shaq Bean team, but I don't have it, but I also don't think I sold it or traded it or gave it away. So I think my memory's a little hazy on that one. I mean, that's how memories can be sometimes. But what I do definitely remember vividly is one, Fleer Ultra basketball pack pulling a Michael Jordan scoring king. The one with the lightning in the background, and it's purple, and it's just this awesome shot of him. I remember pack pulling that, and I've talked about that card on my Instagram feed, and I'll share that story in podcast form another day just to keep this intro short. But for me, this card shop, as a kid, it was my go-to place after school. Other kids, they had after-school enrichment programs or activities like learning piano or being on a sports team or doing something that's going to help them later in life. But for me, I was a latchkey kid in New York City. I did not do anything productive with my after-school activities. It was either the card shop or the playground. And I think I want to maybe have tell a story about my childhood and like playground stuff another time, just keeping it short here. But we were shooting hoops on a metal backboard, metal rim, lucky if there was even a metal net. Sometimes there was no net at all. I mean, cracks on the pavement. I mean, that's the type of playground we had. So it was either card shop or the playground. And speaking of just that time in the early 90s, and again, I'll talk more about junk wax era down the road, and that's just a term for new folks who are like, what are you talking about? But a point I wanted to make here is that what folks may forget in this day and age, where cards can fetch up to, 5, 6, 7 figures, even more with the ultra rare, pristine copies of cards, iconic cards, is cards originally, and I promise I'm not going to go into the history of cards here, but when I was growing up in the early 90s, cards were actually the cheap way to get into sports and to be a fan of a player or a team. Because I remember as a kid, families with more money having their kids, like taking them to actual games. They bought them jerseys. They bought them really nice sneakers. Yet I'm a child of immigrants. I'm Korean American. But as a child of immigrants, just trying to make it in America, we didn't have money. My parents didn't take me to games. They didn't buy me jerseys or nice Nikes, not because they didn't love me, or so I would like to think. Let me think about that. But they were barely making it America, like I was saying. So cards were actually the cheap way to get into sports. And I really want that to sink in for some of the, if you're a listener and you're a younger collector, or even if you're an older collector, just let's take a step back and remember that cards nowadays, like in the, in 2023 or, the pandemic bubble that, I'll talk about later down the road too, like cards are now arguably the more expensive way to get into sports. Nowadays, it's more expensive than going to a game or buying a jersey or shoes. And to me, that's just like wild, because it used to be just such an affordable hobby, and again, just a cheap way to enjoy your athletes that you would look up to. So I think I spent way too much time talking about my childhood, but I'll just move it kind of quicker. When I was a teen, my family, we moved down to South Florida during my high school years. Cards came down with me. I still collected, but not that much. And then when I went to college, I left my cards behind. I would analogize that to like Andy from Toy Story 3. Like, I don't want to play with you anymore. I didn't really collect until I finished that phase of my life with with my post grad or my post high school education. I got back into the hobby in 2008. That's when I got my first adult paycheck. I got sucked right back in. And when I had my first child in 2012, I stopped again. And I didn't return until 10 years later, which is, brings us to current times. So now I am 40, just like it says, I'm a man, I'm 40. That's where I need to like insert a video clip of Mike Gundy, the Oklahoma State coach who did that. But I turned 40 in 2022, and I really did initially joke that this was my midlife crisis. And then I realized it wasn't a joke. It actually is. And yet it is cheaper than sports cars, CARS, not cards. But nowadays, not by much. It's sports cards they're not cheap. So what did I want to say? Okay, I'm running out of steam already again. But all right, so here's the thing. The point I wanted to make is that with midlife crises, I'm not sure many people talk about this, or at least I haven't heard about it talked about enough, whether it's in hobby content or just other podcasts. But it's just my opinion that it is a luxury or a privilege to get to have a midlife crisis, because in order to pay for the cards or the cars, whatever, you need disposable income. And yet, like I said earlier, I want this to be evergreen content, but I don't want to be blind to the current times in our lives, at least in the United States here. There's a lot of economic uncertainty, and the hobby, again, I mentioned earlier that there was this bubble or peak during the pandemic, and we currently are in the middle of a downturn or market correction where, things are more affordable. But, if you are in the hobby and you came back to it and you are, in your 40s, or you're chasing your childhood cards that give you nostalgia and good memories, I mean, I would say consider yourself lucky. We have the ability and the means, the financial and otherwise, to chase our childhoods. I think that's really cool. And I don't want to take that for granted. We're also in a really interesting time in the hobby, I think, just from learning from people who were here during the pandemic bubble. I think that we're in a crossroads, actually, especially with Fanatics about to take over the NBA and NFL licenses. But here's the, I guess, point in time that we are in the hobby. And I guess this is more for like sports cards than, the pop culture cards. But we're post-pandemic, we're pre-Fanatics takeover, we're post Last Dance Michael Jordan documentary, we're pre Adam Sandler sports card hobby movie. We're currently buzzing about the Netflix show King of Collectibles, which hopefully will bring more people into the hobby. So I think we are kind of in a hobby crossroads right now. At least that's my opinion. And we're in a place where the CEO of Fanatics, Michael Rubin, has stated a really great soundbite. We want to 10x the hobby, and so I presume that means the number of people in the hobby, but as a corporation, they could also be meaning 10x profits or 10x revenue. I don't know, right? I mean, hey, this is an open invitation for Michael Rubin to come onto this podcast. Yeah. So basically, what was I trying to say? See, I gotta pause again. And again, I don't want to delete this. Just pausing, and I'll come back. All right, man. This is hard. Not gonna lie. All right, so why did I bring up the background and the crossroads and the luxury and all that? I mean, why do I bring all of that up? Because I want you to know my cardboard journey. I think we all have a journey. And for me, I'll very much admit the last time I re-entered the hobby from this 4-year period from 2008 to 2012, which culminated with me going to the 2012 National. At that time, it was in Baltimore, and my son was born like just months after that, and I just stopped. But I think the reason I stopped too wasn't just because he was born, but 2008 to 2012. I mean, my recollection of that time was, social media was just coming on board. I'm sure, yeah, there was Facebook, but I don't remember there being Instagram. I don't remember there being podcasts, or at least sports card hobby podcasts. I know there was eBay, but I didn't buy much off of eBay. I would like buy boxes and sealed wax. And yes, there was Blowout Cards Forum, but I didn't really feel a sense of community at that time. But now in 2023, there are so many ways to connect with the hobby, and there's so many people to connect with within the hobby, and there's so many more ways to enjoy the hobby and aspects of the hobby than I ever knew about. And so I do believe that there's so much great content out there in the podcast world, and I guess some bad content. I don't know. I'm not going to criticize the bad content, but there's so much out there. And for me, again, just to kind of recenter myself, and my guiding light or guiding star for all this is to try different things, tell you my experiences, what worked, didn't work, and again, it may work for you, may not work for you. Your mileage may vary. That's, you could say that about a lot of things in life. But I don't think there's a lot of scripted content out there for the sports card podcast world. And again, these monologues are going to be kind of scripted, loosely scripted, talking points. I don't know. And then the interviews, that's where it's going to kind of be more free form. So what I want to do, again, talking about the structure of this podcast, because this is like the prologue episode, is explain to you that my goal is to have different aspects of the hobby and break them up into different episodes and call them like chapters, much like a book, continuing with this Hobby S. Thompson theme in the Rum Diary, the Card Diary. And for each chapter, I want to have sections to dive deeper into, those particular things that I've been doing. And I think in the beginning, it's going to be pretty transactional. It's going to be about buying, I call it BTS. I know a lot of us say buy, sell, trade, but I like BTS, so buy, trade, sell. And what I would like to do for this first chapter is, it's a no-brainer, because it's the way a lot of us enter into the hobby, and that's buying. So it really could be an entire podcast by itself. There's so much to talk about when it comes to buying, trading, selling. And, for me, just thinking about buying, there's buying, in person at a card show. There's buying at your local card shop. There's buying on Whatnot, buying on eBay, buying in auction houses, buying at a bigger show, meeting up with people with transactions, mailing, like buying things off Instagram and social media. And you can even buy as a dealer. Like, you can set up as a dealer at a card show and buy, even though you're in sell mode. I sure know this. I've bought probably more than I should have as a show dealer. So those are just several ways that I've mentioned about how to buy. And then there's selling. There's the flip side. Sorry, I ended up getting a call and it deleted stuff. Again, I'm still learning. This is like me I just need to power through this. Okay, so what was I talking about? The flip side. So when it comes to the flip side of the buying equation, there's selling. Okay, so you can set up as a dealer, you can sell online, you can do, I don't want this to be chapter 1 yet, but you can sell on a streaming platform. Whatnot is just one of them. There's other ones, Card Shop Live, Drip, and Fanatics Live is coming soon, which may be a game changer. We'll see. But you can also consign to an auction house. You can also set up, like I said. And then there's trading, which I will just briefly say. Trade night is, a fun activity, and it's possible that you have a year or two under your belt in the hobby and that you have not yet gone to your first card show or your first trade night. I know a bunch of people on Instagram who are in that boat, who love the hobby, love the online transactions and yet have not been to their first trade night or their first card show, like a big one or something like that. Or that I know some podcasters who have amazing cards and they are really active in the community, their local community, and that they're active in Facebook groups and Instagram, and they've never downloaded or used Whatnot or bought in a stream or gotten into a break. So I feel like I've been in both worlds, and that's why I wanted to share this. So some of this may resonate with you. Some of it may, you may just listen and go, oh, I know all about that and it's boring. That's fine. I mean, I just want to cover all of it because in the beginning, it really can feel like you're drinking water from a fire hose. And you can also have that sense of FOMO, whether it is online or whether it's in person with a card. It's just my opinion that for my experiences, I do get a greater sense of FOMO when I have that card in my hand or I see it. It's almost like when you're test driving a car. Like people want you to, have that card or that slab in your hands because they know that there's a greater likelihood of you feeling some emotional attachment to want to buy that card. So again, I'm not an expert in any of this. I'm just sharing with you that that's how I felt. And that's kind of how this is going to be. I'll just be sharing my thoughts and my experiences, and your mileage may vary. And my hope is that when I have these great guests who are coming along for the ride and sharing, that, it's almost like we're going on this journey together. I guess as the host, I'm driving the car, but they're riding shotgun, or maybe you as a listener, you're riding shotgun, and they're in the back, and they're just like talking to us, and we're just having this long, nice road trip, and we're just gonna have some fun along the way. So I guess that in a way is a teaser for the first chapter, and I'm not gonna pause it because I got paused earlier unexpectedly. So I'm just gonna bring this inaugural episode to a wrap. I want to say thank you for listening to this podcast. I have no clue who's going to listen to this, but I do hope that some of you reach out and let me know that you did. It is, well, I was going to say before I give you my handles, I think I mentioned them at the top. Let me just say, it's like really nerve-wracking to start something from zero, but it's so exciting. And again, kind of like that luxury thing I was talking about with the luxury of having a midlife crisis. It's like I get to start this from zero, and you as a listener, you're listening to this. I don't know, I'm just kind of like putting myself out there, and I get to try to start this podcast, and I have no clue how long. Like I said, my plan is for this to be a limited podcast series. I don't want to be doing this every week for, perpetuity. I have an idea of doing this for about like 12 monologues with guest spots. I don't know how long this is going to go. I hope I, finish my book per se, my audio book or the car diary. But right now, I'm starting from zero. I don't have listenership yet, but there is that potential, and that's thrilling to me. The potential in that word "yet." I don't have a listenership yet. The power of that word is that it preserves our potential. So similarly with all the aspects of the hobby I plan on touching on this podcast, maybe you don't grade cards yet. Maybe you don't create custom card art yet, or that you break yet, or create content yet. But you have the potential to do so. And I hope that when I show you my experiences in doing it, it's easy to do. I mean, I'm not saying that you're going to master it or that I've mastered it, but, give it a try. I hope that maybe you can get a sense of how hard it is to do and attain a level of appreciation for those who do it, just so that we're not like othering each other. With social media, there's the good and the bad. Like the good is that you learn so much. You can learn on YouTube and podcasts. You can learn anything you want and be anything you want. And then the bad part of it is how fracturing it can be, and how siloed we can become, and how just so fractured we can become, in and out of the hobby. We're always like just criticizing people who don't do things the way we do them, and we create these echo chambers within ourselves. So, I'm sorry. I'll I'll try to stay more on script here, I guess. But, earlier in my hobby life, there was no way I thought that I could be a dealer or a seller or a content creator. But there is this democratization in the hobby, and you really can be anything you want to be if you're willing to put the work in. So, okay, I did say I was going to wrap it up. So let me wrap it up now. Inaugural episode. If I went long, I don't know. I'll give you a refund on your on the cost of this podcast. How about that? But we also know that time is a very valuable resource. So whether you were doing chores or whether you were, on your commute to or from work, whatever it is, I hope you enjoyed this. If you have Instagram, hit me up. Denny_cards is my original Instagram account. The podcast account that I'm starting from zero is Hobby S. Thompson, all one word, no periods, no spaces. You can also email me, I guess. I have a hobby email account. It's dennycards23@gmail.com. Again, the Michael Jordan reference or the influence. Or also the new email account that I created for this podcast. It's, again, all one word, hobbysthompson@gmail.com. So thank you so much. I think I don't have an outro, or I haven't figured this out yet. Just be good to each other, have fun. I'm going to actually roll right into the chapter 1, so I guess this is the end of the prologue, and then I'll have guests on, and then I'll do chapter 2. I don't know. We're going to figure it out together, though, I think. And thank you so much for listening to this. I really look forward to this.